everybody. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of screencast feedback in response to the pre-work that you did for session number 6. And this is where you're unpacking one of the key outcomes in your class. This is also a way just for me to model this idea of the just-in-time teaching, the lecture that comes on the back end where students have been allowed to struggle with something for a little while, and then you step in as the teacher or the expert and provide a little bit more clarification or some additional thoughts for people to think about. And so super fun to read through these. You all were doing just fantastic work. It was really fun to see how you're struggling productively and how other colleagues are going in and trying to help you along with that struggle. So that was super cool. In this discussion, there were some questions that came up that I thought would be useful to call out and then maybe just talk a little bit more about. And before I go to those, I'll just mention that I'm trying to be very mindful of the time that I'm taking in this video because some recent research that I've looked at suggests that students really only hang in there for about 6 minutes if they're watching video feedback that is educationally related. I know, that's very grim, but 6 minutes is the attention span for this kind of thing. And then after 9 minutes, it drops off significantly, and after 12 minutes, forget it. Nobody's still watching the video at that point. So I'm hoping our attention spans are a little bit better than 6 minutes. I won't say anything more about that, but let's see. So the first question that I wanted to bring up here for examination was this really neat question that Jeff asked about, which was this idea of caring. So if we're getting students to do all of this, these cognitive tasks, what is the role of caring? How does it fit into Bloom's taxonomy? So I think that's a really interesting question. Karen had mentioned that maybe it fits under evaluate, and I think that makes sense. A student at some point might evaluate consciously or subconsciously whether they actually care about this material, and that may affect all of these other levels, right? And so you're probably not going to remember something that you don't care about. You might only remember it long enough to pass the test, but if it's not something that your brain deems as important through connections or reasonable to hang on to, there's really no reason for you to learn it in these various ways. And so for me, caring might be more of like kind of like a precursor to these things. Like, you know, if the students can care, can make authentic connections with whatever it is that you're about to delve into, they're more likely to be successful in these different levels of thinking and learning. So that's my thought on it. It's a great question. Definitely something worth thinking about. Marty asked this question about how do we have time for formative assessments if we're doing more practice, if we're scaffolding things more, if we're really drilling down to those sub-skills, how are we going to get feedback to students in a timely manner? And that's an excellent question. And I just had a few quick thoughts on that. And so first of all, what can you assess in class? So if you're not spending most of your time lecturing to students, what observations can you make during class? How can you be observing what they're doing in group work or having them write some things down that are short and turn it in so that you have a sense by the time they leave that day whether or not something's working. I have a friend who uses something called Google Slides, and that's a way for students to work on these slides, and she can look on her own computer and see the work that they're producing. So while they're actually doing the work in their groups, she's looking at the slides on her computers to see in real time the thinking that the students are doing on the page. And so that is in-class assessment, and it works great. I personally have started collecting things in class and reading them while the students are working. And so students may turn in like a pre-work to me, or they may do something at the beginning of class, and I will read through it to get a sense of where are they right now and what do I need to tell them before they leave class today in order to get them to the next place. So those kinds of in-class assessments are awesome. Also, what can you assess quickly? So now that I think of the outside work as pre-work, not just homework, it's not this thing that I take with me after class. That's kind of like the after-class burden, the papers that I leave with. It's really this more kind of, it's the exciting precursor to class. So 15 or 20 minutes before class, I may go into D2L and take a look at, okay, where are they right now? What did they submit? And I'll just take a quick read through all of that. And as I walk into class that day, I know exactly where my students are. And that shapes the way that I'm able to talk with them, how much time we spend on things. And then I just go back in and I give them points for completion later. And I find myself spending significantly less time kind of scouring over every single thing that they wrote, when all I need to do is get a sense of where they are as a class and give them the points for completion. The other thing to think about is being very deliberate about where you invest your feedback. We could certainly comment on everything that students turn in, but we just do not have the capacity, and that's not sustainable. And so where's the best use of your time and feedback in terms of moving students toward the outcome, toward whatever it is that you're going to meaningfully assess them on? How do you get them there? So a couple of examples. I was coaching somebody recently, and she shared with me all the different kinds of feedback that she gives to students within a couple of weeks for one essay. And it was pretty significant. And I asked her, of all this feedback that you give to students, which one are you certain that they use? What do you think that they are most likely to actually take, read, think critically about, and apply? And she said absolutely the intervention draft feedback. And that's where they turn in a rough draft. She gives them comments on how to improve the rough draft, and then they go and use those comments. And that makes perfect sense. As a student, those comments are super useful. It's like, I took a shot at this. I'm not up to par. My teacher's showing me how I can get better. I'm going to pay attention to what she says, and I'm going to try harder. My next time, I'm going to try to incorporate those ideas. These comments, the justification of the grade comments, she was giving them comments like, here's how you might think about these ideas with our next essay. The grammar feedback, what we found was that, she doesn't think students are really paying attention to that. And those are hours of her day that she's putting into those comments. So another example that I want to give you about deliberate planning when it comes to giving feedback is create the assignments that seem worthwhile, that will allow you to see where students are at, okay? And so let me give you an example. Here's an example of an assignment that I recently realized is not worthwhile. So this is in our learning community class, and students are writing essay 3. And for the past several semesters, I've had them doing this assignment. And basically the assignment has to do with some stuff that they've read from the book and how those ideas might apply to the essay that they're doing in my class. So look at how huge this assignment is. 1 to 2 hours to complete. They're using their textbook, and they're being asked to think about these concepts that come up in the textbook, okay? So this principle of old before new, all these different kinds of writing mistakes that students make, just various things that came from the book. And I think what I was probably suffering from at this point when I designed this was guilt for not using the book enough and feeling like students really need to use this book more because they bought it. Okay. And so I was trying to get students to take these concepts from the textbook and to connect them to what they were doing with essay 3, but it wasn't a very tightly focused assignment. And I would give them a lot of comments on this, and I don't think it helped them with their essay 3 papers. I really don't. And so I was only able to see this when I was forced to drop the book this semester. So I had to decide whether or not I wanted to create a different activity here. And I thought this was totally useless. This did not help my students along at all. I mean, it had to do with the course content, but it wasn't actually driving them toward that particular outcome that I had in mind. So what do I do now? Okay, so for this semester, we're going to do a peer review for that essay instead. So all that time that they would have invested in that other assignment, which I don't think is very useful, they're actually going to post a draft. Eric and I are going to comment on those drafts and give them feedback that is going to be very applicable and useful. And they'll spend that time getting to read their peers' work and getting feedback from their peers and so on and so forth. And so I guess I show you this because I want you to think about, where are we using our comments most wisely? It reminds me of Noelle's title of her post, Work Smarter, Not Harder, because we can lose hours to commenting on student work. But where are those comments going to really matter? Where are those comments going to drive them toward the growth and the progress that we want to see? Not just comments for the sake of commenting. Okay, so let's see what else is over here. And okay, so we're almost at 10 minutes, so some of you are probably dropping off at this point. Last thing, Molly said, if we take the time to give them our feedback, how do we even know if they're actually reading it? That's such a great question. How do we make sure they're reading it? And that's a really hard thing to do. One thing that Eric and I have discovered is that we use code words. So when we make our students video feedback, we hide code words in it. And so if somebody tells us what the code word is, then we will give them a prize, or we will give them a couple of extra credit points or something like that. These extra credit points do not amount to anything really in the end of the semester, hardly anything at all, but students love that idea of extra credit and incentives, and so we vary code words in our feedback, and that lets us know how many people have watched it. And so I'm actually going to I'm gonna bury a code word in this right now. And so let's see. We are in fall. I guess maybe I'll just make the code word Halloween. And so if you email me with the code word Halloween, that will let me know that you've watched this video, and I will bring a prize for you to our session 7. That'll happen in another week. Okay, so the code words I think help, and then the other thing is making those careful choices. So if you give students good constructive feedback in places where they need it and want it, and you tell them that that feedback is there, they're much more likely to go and look at it than if it feels like they're getting an assignment back 3 weeks later with some comments on it that justify a grade. They may or may not look at those comments. So, okay, well, I'm going to stop there because this is getting to be long, but yes, this was just to model just-in-time teaching for you, to kind of dig in a little bit more with that discussion that we had going on. Certainly, if things came up in the discussion board that you want to talk about more, reach out to me, reach out to Eric, reach out to your colleagues. There's great stuff that came up in there, and not everything got resolved. So nice work, everybody.